3 days before my wedding, I found out my fiancé had been sleeping with my sister. And the worst part, they weren't asking me to forgive them. They were asking me to step aside. Juliana had spent years believing Corin was the man she would grow old with. The wedding venue was booked. The invitations were already out. Her dress was hanging in the closet, waiting for the final fitting. Every little detail had been planned. She had even started imagining what their life would look like after the wedding. Then one evening, Corin asked her to sit down. His face looked different. No smile, no warmth, just guilt. Angela was standing behind him. Juliana immediately knew something was wrong. Corin tried to explain that things had become complicated. He said his feelings had changed. Then Angela stepped forward. She didn't look ashamed. She looked determined. "I didn't plan for this to happen," Angela said. "But I love him." Juliana stared at her sister. Her own sister. The woman who had helped her choose flowers for the wedding. The woman who had stood beside her during dress shopping. The woman who had hugged her and called her lucky to have Corin. Now that same woman was telling her she loved her fiancé. Linda, their mother, rushed into the room after hearing the argument. Instead of demanding that Corin leave, she begged Juliana to stay calm. "Please," Linda said, "don't let this destroy the family." But Juliana could barely hear her. She looked at Corin. "Is this what you want?" Corin hesitated. Then he said the words that broke whatever was left of their relationship. "I want Angela." Juliana felt something inside her go completely still. She slowly removed her engagement ring. She placed it on the table. Nobody moved. She didn't scream. She didn't slap Angela. She didn't beg Corin to choose her. She simply stood up. Linda grabbed her arm. "Juliana, where are you going?" "Home. This is your home." Juliana looked around the room. For the first time, it didn't feel like one. She picked up her bag and walked toward the door. Behind her, Angela moved closer to Corin. They thought they had won. They thought Juliana had just lost the man she loved and the future she had planned. But before she left, Juliana turned toward her sister. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. "You can have Corin." Angela smiled faintly. Then Juliana added, "But you have no idea what else you're taking." Angela's smile disappeared, because she didn't understand what Juliana already knew. And the truth about that wedding was only the beginning. The wedding I had spent months planning was now being planned for my sister. And somehow, I was the one being told to forgive. The morning after I left the room where Corin had chosen Angela, I returned to the family house to collect my things. I expected awkward silence. I didn't expect to see wedding samples spread across the dining table. Angela was sitting there with a notebook open, talking excitedly about flowers, decorations, and the guest list. "My guest list. My wedding. My sister." She looked up at me and smiled. "I hope you don't mind," she said. "We're trying to keep everything simple." Simple. The same wedding she had stolen was now being discussed like it had always belonged to her. Linda followed me into the hallway. "Juliana, please," she whispered. "Don't make this worse." I turned toward her. "Mom, they already made it worse." Linda sighed. "People make mistakes." Corin says his feelings changed. That sentence stayed with me. His feelings changed. As if 5 years together could disappear overnight. As if the promises, plans, and memories meant nothing. When I finally confronted Corin, he didn't apologize. He simply said, "I can't force myself to love you the way I used to." I looked at him carefully. "You couldn't tell me before the wedding." He looked away. That told me everything. Angela, meanwhile, seemed happier than I had ever seen her. She was already trying on wedding dresses. She was already talking about their honeymoon. She even asked me if I still wanted to keep some of the decorations I had purchased. I almost laughed. Instead, I packed a suitcase. A few clothes. Some photographs. A handful of personal things. I left the wedding dress behind. I left the decorations behind. I left the engagement ring behind. And most importantly, I left Corin behind. But as I drove away from the house, something suddenly came back to me. Months earlier, Corin had asked me strange questions about my grandmother. He had wanted to know what happened to her property after she died. He had asked whether I had access to her financial records. At the time, I thought he was simply curious about our future. Now I wasn't so sure. I pulled over and searched through my phone. I found an old conversation. Corin had asked about the estate. Then another message. And another. They weren't random questions. They had been happening for months. Long before I knew about Angela. Long before the wedding collapsed. My hands started shaking. This wasn't just about my sister stealing my fiancé. Corin had been investigating something. Something that belonged to my family. And suddenly, I realized the question wasn't why did he leave me? What was he hoping to get from me? I stared at the messages again. And for the first time, I wondered if losing Corin was actually the least important thing I had just lost. The messages looked harmless at first. But when Juliana read them again, she realized Corin had been quietly studying her family long before he ever decided to leave her. She sat at Ellery's kitchen table with her phone in one hand and a stack of old family documents in the other. The pain from the broken engagement was still fresh, but something else had replaced it. Suspicion. Juliana opened one of her oldest conversations with Corin. There it was. A question about her grandmother's property. Then another about the estate. Then one about whether the family investments were divided equally between the sisters. At the time, Juliana had smiled when she read those messages. She had thought Corin was planning ahead. Maybe he was thinking about where they would live after the wedding. Maybe he wanted to understand the family because he was going to become part of it. Now, every question feels different. Look at this one, Juliana said. Ellery leaned closer. Corin had asked about a particular piece of land her grandmother owned. Juliana stared at the message. I never told him about that. Ellery looked at her. Then how did he know? Juliana didn't answer. She kept scrolling. There were more questions. Some were about investments. Others were about the family house. There were even questions about what would happen if something happened to Juliana's mother. It was no longer a coincidence. Corin had been collecting information. And he had been doing it quietly. Ellery opened an old message thread between Juliana and Angela. Then she stopped. Juliana. What? Ellery turned the phone toward her. Angela had once mentioned a detail about one of their grandmother's investments. It was a detail Juliana had never told her. Juliana's stomach tightened. Maybe Mom told her, she said. Ellery shook her head. Maybe. But there's something else. She searched through older messages. Angela had asked Juliana about another property months earlier. At the time, Juliana had ignored the question. Now she understood why it mattered. Her sister had been asking questions too. The room became strangely quiet. Juliana looked at the two phones sitting on the table. Corin had been interested in her family's wealth. Angela had been interested in the same things. And both had been asking questions before the betrayal. Juliana suddenly remembered something she had almost forgotten. A few months earlier, Angela had asked her for the name of the family's legal advisor. Juliana had thought nothing of it. Now she searched her email. There was an old notification. A request had been made for information connected to her grandmother's estate. Juliana opened the attachment. Her face changed. Someone had requested a copy of her inheritance records. And the name attached to the request was Angela. Juliana slowly put down her phone. She had spent days believing her sister stole her fiancé. But now she was beginning to wonder if Corin was only one part of a much bigger plan. And Angela had been digging into Juliana's inheritance long before anyone knew the wedding would never happen. The inheritance Corin thought he could eventually control had one rule he never knew about. He could never own it. Juliana drove back to her grandmother's old property the next morning, carrying the questions that had kept her awake all night. If Corin had been asking about the estate before the breakup, she needed to know why. The property had belonged to her grandmother for decades. It was a beautiful piece of land surrounded by old trees, a large family house, and several smaller cottages. Juliana had spent much of her childhood there. But there was one room she had avoided since her grandmother died. The old study. She unlocked the door and began searching through the cabinets. Behind a row of dusty books, she found a small wooden box. Inside were estate papers, old letters, and a thick folder marked with her grandmother's name. Juliana opened it carefully. The first document changed everything. Her grandmother had placed strict conditions on the inheritance. The property could not simply be transferred to a husband through marriage. It could not be sold without specific approval. And no spouse could claim control over it simply because Juliana married him. Juliana sat back in disbelief. Suddenly, Corin's questions made sense. He had been trying to understand something he thought would eventually belong to him. But there was more. One of the documents showed that someone had recently attempted to change part of the inheritance arrangement. Juliana's heart began racing. Who would do that? She called Elizabeth, her aunt. When Elizabeth arrived, Juliana showed her the papers. Elizabeth stared at one page for several seconds. Then her expression changed. "I remember something," she said. "What?" "Angela came to see the family lawyer months ago." Juliana froze. "Angela?" Elizabeth nodded. "She said she needed advice about some family documents. I didn't think much of it at the time. But now, everything felt connected. Angela had asked about the inheritance. Corin had asked about the property. Someone had tried to change the estate documents. And both of them had been doing it before Juliana knew anything was wrong. There was only one person who could explain what had happened next. Benedict. He had been the family's legal advisor for years. When Juliana showed him the documents, he became unusually quiet. He studied the papers carefully. Then he looked directly at her. "Juliana, there's something you need to understand." "What?" "The person who tried to change these documents didn't have enough information to do it alone." Juliana's stomach tightened. Benedict continued. "Someone gave them private information about your grandmother's estate." Juliana stared at him. "Who?" Benedict slowly closed the folder. "That information came from inside your family." For the first time, Juliana realized this wasn't just a betrayal by her sister. Someone inside her own family had been helping them. Everyone thought Juliana was falling apart. That was exactly how she wanted it. After Benedict's warning, Juliana stopped asking questions in front of her family. She stopped arguing with Linda. She stopped reacting whenever Angela posted another photograph with Corin. She let them believe they had won. At home, Juliana cried when people expected her to cry. She stayed quiet when relatives called to check on her. And when Angela proudly announced another wedding plan, Juliana simply smiled and said she was happy for them. But behind that quiet face, something was changing. Juliana had finally stopped trying to understand why Corin left. Now she wanted to understand who she had become while she was with him. For years, she had put aside one dream because Corin had convinced her it wasn't practical. She had once wanted to restore old countryside properties and turn them into beautiful spaces for families and travelers. Corin had laughed when she mentioned it. He told her it was too risky. Eventually, Juliana stopped talking about it. Now Ellery brought the idea back. "You didn't stop dreaming because you stopped caring," he told her. "You stopped because someone convinced you that your dream wasn't worth chasing." Those words stayed with her. So Juliana began again. She started with one small property. She cleaned it. She repaired the walls. She made plans. Nobody in her family knew. While Juliana worked quietly, Angela was living the life she had wanted. She posted pictures with Corin. She talked about their future. She told people she had finally found someone who understood her. Corin seemed just as confident. He believed Juliana would eventually get tired of being alone. He even told a friend that she would come back when she realized how difficult life was without him. But Juliana wasn't coming back. She was moving forward. Then one afternoon, Juliana received a phone call. It was from Aldric, a former business associate of Corin. Aldric had been silent since Corin ended their professional relationship. Now he wanted to talk. Juliana met him privately. Aldric looked uncomfortable. "I should have told you this earlier," he said. Juliana waited. Corin and Angela weren't a new thing. Her heart stopped. "What do you mean?" Aldric lowered his voice. "They had been seeing each other long before you found out." Juliana stared at him. "How long?" Aldric hesitated. "Months." The room suddenly felt smaller. Juliana had thought Angela stole her fiancé after their relationship ended. But Aldric had just confirmed something much worse. Angela hadn't taken Corin after Juliana lost him. She had been taking him while Juliana was still planning their wedding. Corin didn't just betray Juliana with her sister. He may have chosen Angela because of what Juliana was going to inherit. That possibility hit Juliana harder than the affair itself. Aldric sat across from her, looking uncomfortable as he explained what Corin had asked him months earlier. It wasn't normal business, Aldric said. Juliana stayed silent. What did he ask? Aldric took a breath. He wanted to know about your family's property. Juliana's expression tightened. Aldric continued. He asked how much control you had over it. He wanted to know what would happen if you married. He even asked whether your husband could eventually become involved in the property. Juliana felt cold. Corin had asked similar questions while they were still together. But hearing them from someone else made everything different. He was planning ahead, she whispered. Aldric nodded. He wanted information about your assets. Juliana looked down at the table. For years, she had believed Corin was interested in her life because he loved her. She had thought his questions about her grandmother's estate meant he was thinking about their future. Now she wondered if he had been thinking about something else entirely. Aldric told her he refused to help. I told him it wasn't my business, he said. I wouldn't give him private information about you or your family. What happened after that? He stopped working with me. Juliana looked up. He ended your professional relationship because you wouldn't help him. Aldric nodded. That was when I realized his questions weren't innocent. The pieces were starting to fit. Corin had asked about Juliana's inheritance. Angela had secretly requested information about the estate. Someone inside the family had provided private details. And now Aldric was telling Juliana that Corin had deliberately ended their professional relationship after being refused. The affair suddenly looked different. Juliana thought about Angela. Why her? Why had Corin chosen her sister? Maybe it wasn't simply because Angela was attractive. Maybe Angela had access to something Juliana didn't realize. Information, family secrets, and possibly a way into the inheritance. Juliana's hands tightened around her phone. She had spent days believing Corin had simply fallen out of love with her. Now she was beginning to suspect that his love story with Angela had another purpose. That evening, Juliana contacted Benedict. He agreed to meet her privately. When she showed him what Aldric had revealed, Benedict became unusually serious. I may have something you need to see, he said. He opened an old file. Inside were records of communications from months earlier. Juliana scanned the pages. Then she froze. There were references to her inheritance. And the dates were impossible to ignore. They came from a time when Corin and Angela were supposedly nothing more than brother-in-law and sister-in-law. Juliana slowly looked at Benedict. They were discussing my inheritance before they were even a couple. Benedict said nothing. He didn't need to. Juliana finally understood. The romance may have come later. The plan may have come first. While Angela was walking down the aisle in the wedding that was supposed to be mine, I was signing papers that would make sure Corin could never take what belonged to me. I didn't attend their wedding. I didn't send a message. I didn't stand outside the church. I simply disappeared from the celebration. And that was exactly what everyone expected. Linda told relatives that I needed time to heal. Angela probably believed I couldn't handle seeing her become Corin's wife. Corin, from what I heard later, assumed I was sitting somewhere alone, regretting my decision. They were wrong. That morning, I sat in a quiet office with Benedict. A stack of documents rested between us. These papers were not about Corin. They were about my future. Benedict carefully explained each part before I signed. My grandmother's wishes were being protected. The property remained under the conditions she had created. My inheritance could not simply become part of a marriage. And Corin could not claim control just because he was now connected to my family through Angela. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than anger. I felt relieved. But protecting my inheritance wasn't enough. I needed to protect myself. So I started making a financial plan of my own. I reviewed my savings. I looked at the investments I had ignored during my relationship. I contacted people I had pushed away. And I began thinking seriously about the dream I had abandoned years earlier. I wasn't planning revenge. Not yet. I was building independence. That distinction mattered. Because if I spent all my energy trying to destroy Corin, he would still control part of my life. I wanted something different. I wanted to become impossible to control. Meanwhile, Angela was having the wedding of her dreams. Beautiful flowers, expensive decorations, family photographs, a smiling groom. Everyone believed she had won. Pictures from the ceremony spread through the family. Linda looked happy. Angela looked radiant. Corin looked proud. And somewhere far away from all of it, Juliana was quietly signing the final documents that protected the one thing they had been trying to understand. My inheritance. My property. My future. That evening, Benedict called me. His voice sounded calmer than usual. Juliana, there's something you should know. I sat down. What is it? He paused. Corin has no legal claim to your protected assets. I closed my eyes. For months, Corin had been asking questions about what he might gain. He had chosen my sister. He had broken my family apart. He thought he was walking into a future filled with everything he wanted. But he had made one mistake. He never understood what he was actually marrying into. And while he celebrated his wedding, I was making sure he could never own my future. The day Corin watched Angela walk down the aisle, he thought he had won. But while he was celebrating a new marriage, I was quietly taking back the one thing he never thought I could control. My future. For weeks, everyone believed I was broken. They thought losing Corin had taken away my confidence, my direction, and my purpose. They were wrong. I had spent too many years building my life around someone else's dreams. Now, I was finally building my own. With Benedict's guidance, I officially took control of my grandmother's property. The same estate Corin had spent months asking questions about. The same place he believed would one day become part of his life. But he was never going to own it. I walked through the property with a different feeling this time. Before, I saw memories. Now, I saw possibilities. The old cottages that everyone ignored could become beautiful guest spaces. The unused land could support a business. The family home that had been sitting quietly for years could become something meaningful again. It was the exact idea Corin once laughed at. I still remembered the day I told him I wanted to restore old properties and create something special. He smiled and said, "That sounds like a nice hobby, Juliana. But it's not a real business." Those words stayed with me. Not because they hurt. Because they motivated me. Ellery was the first person to believe in my plan. He helped me organize the work, connect with people, and turn my ideas into action. For the first time in years, I wasn't asking someone for permission to chase my dreams. I was creating something that belonged completely to me. Elizabeth also stood beside me. She reminded me that my grandmother had believed in my strength long before anyone else saw it. Slowly, people began noticing the change. The relatives who once whispered about my failed engagement started asking about my plans. The same people who thought I had lost everything were now impressed by what I was building. But while my life was moving forward, Angela's perfect world was beginning to crack. The expensive lifestyle she expected from Corin was harder to maintain than she imagined. The trips, the luxury, and the image they wanted everyone to see were becoming more difficult to afford. Corin had promised Angela a future filled with success. But he had made one mistake. He planned that future with something that never belonged to him. One evening, Corin finally discovered the truth. The business opportunities he wanted. The property he believed he could access. The financial security he imagined. All of it depended on assets that Juliana completely controlled. And for the first time, Corin realized something terrifying. He hadn't traded up. He had walked away from the one person who could have built that future with him. Corin thought leaving me was the biggest decision of his life. He was right. But he never imagined it would become his biggest regret. For a while, Corin and Angela looked like they had everything. They had the wedding. They had the attention. They had the story everyone believed. But behind closed doors, the perfect picture started falling apart. The excitement slowly disappeared. The smiles became forced. The future they had dreamed about was not as easy as they imagined. Angela had expected a life filled with comfort and luxury. She believed Corin was the man who would give her everything she wanted. But reality was different. The money was tighter. The plans became harder to maintain. And the lifestyle they showed everyone became more difficult to support. Arguments that never happened before started becoming normal. Angela began questioning Corin. She wanted to know why their life wasn't becoming what he promised. Corin had no easy answer. Because the truth was simple. The future he planned was built on something he never owned. While their relationship struggled, Corin started remembering the life he had with me. He remembered the small things. The way I organized their home. The way I supported his dreams. The way I stood beside him when things were difficult. He remembered how many times I helped him solve problems he couldn't handle alone. At the time, he thought those things were ordinary. Now, they were the things he missed the most. Because Angela had given him excitement. But I had given him stability. And he finally understood the difference. One evening, my phone rang. I looked at the screen. It was Corin. For a moment, I simply stared at his name. The same name that once represented my future. The same person who had destroyed everything we built. I answered. His voice was quieter than I remembered. Juliana, I need to talk to you. I stayed silent. He took a deep breath. I made a terrible mistake. Those words would have broken me months earlier. But now, they meant nothing. Corin tried to explain. He said he was confused. He said he made decisions without thinking. He said he missed what we had. But I had already learned something important. Missing someone after losing them does not mean you deserve them back. I hope you find peace, Corin, I told him. But you lost me when you decided I was replaceable. There was silence on the other end. Because he knew I was right. But before the conversation ended, Corin asked something that changed everything. Juliana, what exactly do you know? I paused. That question revealed more than he expected. He wasn't just afraid of losing me. He was afraid of what I could prove. Because I still had the messages. The documents. The evidence. Everything he and Angela thought they had hidden. And for the first time, Corin realized the woman he betrayed was the only person who could expose the truth. The woman who stole my fiancé once stood in front of me with a smile. This time, she stood in front of me with tears in her eyes. Angela had spent months acting like she had won. She took my wedding. She took my place in the family spotlight. She walked away believing she had everything I lost. But now she was standing at my door, asking me for help. I knew something had changed before she even spoke. The confidence was gone. The happiness she showed everyone was gone. The woman who once looked proud was now struggling to hide how badly things had fallen apart. Juliana, I need to talk to you, she said quietly. I stepped aside and let her enter. I didn't welcome her. I didn't attack her. I simply listened. Angela sat down and took a deep breath. Then she started explaining. She told me Corin was not the same anymore. She said he had become distant. He was always stressed. He spent more time thinking about money and problems than their marriage. The life she thought she was getting was not the life she was living. I thought we would be happy, she whispered. I watched her carefully. Because months earlier, I had said the same thing. I thought I would be happy with Corin. I thought my wedding day would be the beginning of a beautiful future. But Angela didn't just lose a dream. She destroyed someone else's to chase hers. I don't know what happened to him, she said. That was when I finally spoke. You really don't know. Angela looked at me, and for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. Juliana, I know everything. The room became silent. She stopped moving. I continued. I know about the messages. Her face changed. I know about the questions you both asked about my inheritance. Angela opened her mouth to respond. But I didn't let her change the subject. I know Corin was looking into my family's property before he ever left me. Angela quickly shook her head. It wasn't like that. Corin was the one who started everything. I looked at her calmly. There it was. The same thing people always did when they were caught. They tried to pass the blame. But I wasn't going to let her pretend she had no choice. You made your own decisions, Angela. You knew I was planning my wedding. You knew I trusted you. And you still chose him. Her eyes filled with tears. But this time, I didn't feel the same pain I once felt. Because I finally understood something. An apology does not erase a betrayal. Then I stood up and walked toward my desk. I picked up a folder. Angela stared at it. Inside were the things they thought I would never find. The messages. The documents. The records. Every piece of evidence they left behind. I placed the folder on the table. I kept everything. Angela looked at the evidence in silence. And for the first time, she realized the truth. I wasn't the woman they destroyed. I was the woman who had been watching, learning, and preparing. The truth did not destroy Juliana. It destroyed the people who thought she would stay silent. For months, Corin and Angela had controlled the story. They told people that love had changed. They acted like their relationship was something beautiful that happened by accident. But the truth was finally coming out. And this time, Juliana was ready. She did not stand in front of everyone screaming. She did not beg anyone to understand her pain. She simply presented the facts. The messages. The documents. The conversations they thought were hidden forever. Every piece of evidence showed the same thing. Corin and Angela had been planning around Juliana's inheritance before their betrayal became public. The family that once questioned Juliana's choices finally saw what had really happened. Linda was heartbroken, not because Juliana exposed the truth, but because she realized how much had been hidden from her. Angela's perfect image disappeared overnight. The sister who once acted like she had simply followed her heart was now facing difficult questions. People wanted to know when the relationship truly started. They wanted to know why Angela knew private family information. They wanted to know why Corin had asked so many questions about Juliana's assets. For the first time, Angela had no easy answer. But Juliana did something nobody expected. She didn't celebrate Corin losing everything. She didn't ask him to come back. She didn't look at Angela and say, "I won." Because this was never about winning Corin. Juliana finally understood something important. A person who betrays you is not a prize to fight for. Corin was not what she lost. He was what she escaped. What Juliana wanted back was much bigger. She took back her inheritance. She protected her grandmother's property. She built her financial independence. She restored the reputation that others tried to damage. And most importantly, she took back control of her own future. The woman who once walked away from her wedding with a broken heart was gone. In her place was someone stronger. Someone who no longer needed approval from Corin or anyone else. Corin noticed the change. He saw how people respected Juliana. He saw the business she was building. He saw the confidence she carried. And that was when he finally understood. He had not lost a relationship. He had lost the person who helped make his life better. The person he betrayed had become someone he could no longer reach. But Corin wasn't ready to accept that. One evening, he showed up at Juliana's office. No confidence. No excuses. Just regret. "Juliana," he said quietly, "I know I made a mistake." She looked at him without emotion. "I know I hurt you. But please, give me one more chance." For a moment, the room was silent. Because Corin finally understood the truth. He wasn't asking for forgiveness from the woman he once loved. He was asking for another chance from the woman he had underestimated. And Juliana's answer would decide everything. "Years ago, my sister thought she stole my future. She took my fiancé. She took my wedding. She took the life I thought I was going to have. But what she didn't understand was this. She never took my future. She only removed someone who was standing in the way of it." Years had passed since the day everything fell apart. The woman who once left her wedding plans behind with tears in her eyes was no longer the same person. Juliana had built something far greater than the life she lost. The family property that once sat forgotten had become a successful business. The old buildings had been restored. The land had a purpose again. What Corin once called an unrealistic dream had become the foundation of Juliana's success. Her work was respected. Her ideas were valued. And the people who once doubted her now looked at her differently. Ellery remained one of the few people who believed in her from the beginning. He had watched her rebuild herself when everyone else thought she was defeated. Aldric became a trusted business partner, someone who understood her vision and helped her expand what she created. And Benedict continued protecting her family's legacy, making sure everything her grandmother built remained safe for future generations. Meanwhile, Angela and Corin were still together. But their relationship was nothing like the perfect romance they once showed the world. The excitement had faded. The image they created had disappeared. They had the wedding they wanted. But they never found the peace they expected. Then, one afternoon, Juliana saw Corin again. It was the first time they had truly spoken in years. He looked different, older, regretful. I think about what happened all the time, Corin said. Juliana listened quietly. I made the biggest mistake of my life. For a moment, there was silence. The old Juliana might have searched for answers. She might have wanted him to apologize sooner. She might have wondered what could have been. But that woman no longer existed. Corin had lost the chance to be part of her future the moment he chose to betray her. Juliana looked at him calmly. You didn't steal my future, Corin. She paused. You only removed yourself from it. Those words carried no anger. No bitterness. Just acceptance. Then she walked away. No argument. No tears. No second chance. Because the greatest revenge was never watching Corin regret losing her. The greatest revenge was creating a life so fulfilling that she no longer wanted the one he took away. Sometimes, the person who replaces you thinks they have won because they took your place. But they don't realize they only took the seat. They never took the life you were meant to build.